Authority meeting of the City of Edina. Today is Thursday, September 25th. It is 7:33 a.m., and I will call the meeting to order. Executive Director Neal, will you please take the roll call?
Commissioner Risser.
Here.
Commissioner Pierce. Here. Commissioner Agnew.
Here.
Vice Chair Jackson.
Here. And now it's time for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I forgot to say that we are continuing to hold these meetings in a hybrid fashion. Today's meeting, there will only be time for public input for community comment, and you are allowed to speak for up to 3 minutes about anything that is not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing, and that will come up pretty quickly here in our agenda, but we need to approve our agenda. So if we would, anybody have anything they want to change on the agenda? So I have a motion to approve the meeting agenda.
So moved.
I second.
Right. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, we have an agenda. So now, as I said, community comment comes up really quickly. We don't have anybody in the audience right now. Director Bennerat, what's your protocol?
I don't have anyone online yet either, but because there is a slight delay in the broadcast, I recommend we wait about a minute before moving on. My clock shows that it's 7:36, so I will come back to you at 7:37 or when I have a caller, whichever's first.
Terrific, thank you.
It's been a minute and I still don't have any callers. I think we've given people adequate time to call in, so I think it's safe to move forward with your agenda.
Okay, thank you. So, Director Neal, this is when we respond to previous community comments. Was there any comments at our last meeting?
We don't have any community comments from our last meeting to respond to today.
Okay, thank you. So now we're to the consent agenda. Is there anybody who'd like to take things off the consent agenda? All right, we have a couple of matters. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Agnew, second by Commissioner Pierce. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, it passes. And we are on to today's items. Our first item on the agenda is from our Economic Development Manager, Bill Neuendorf, and it's about a resolution amending a spending plan for 3 TIF districts, the Southdale 2, Pentagon Park, and Wooddale Valley View. So hand it over to you, Director Manager Neuendorf.
Great, thank you. Good morning. Yes, this first item is an action item. We are seeking your approval on Resolution 2025-08, which of course is in your packet. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation to review this. We are seeking to amend a spending plan that guides the use of funds from 3 existing tax increment financing districts. I'll go through this in a little bit more detail. The spending plan was first created back in 2021, so it's been a few years, and a lot of the information is the same, but I will call out the couple details that we're seeking to amend and update. So first of all, as a reminder, this is the city's Spark program. That's what we've been branding it as. And it was born from special legislation passed by the state of Minnesota back in 2021. And that legislation allowed municipalities throughout Minnesota a new opportunity to invest their unallocated tax increment funds. So what that means is some older TIF districts, some current TIF districts, have funds that are collected. So these are taxes that have already been paid, and they're collected in the TIF fund, but previous state laws prevented those monies from being spent. So this special legislation gave cities a new opportunity to invest those dollars in their community. Earlier this year, in the 2025 legislative session, the state of Minnesota passed additional new legislation that would slightly modify the terms of how those monies could be spent. So as background, a few years ago, the city did create what we're calling the SPARK program to use these unallocated monies. We use funds, about $700,000 from the Pentagon Park District, about $8.5 million from our Southdale 2 TIF district, which is now expired, and about $350,000 from the old 70th and Cahill Wooddale TIF districts that are also expired, and that created a total amount of about $9.5 million that we put into this unallocated fund to invest in new projects. In a few minutes, I'll go through how we've used those monies. But the new legislation allows us to use the interest earnings on those monies. Before they were spent, they accumulated interest, but the previous tax laws did not allow those interest earnings to be spent. So the new legislation recognizes that interest was accumulated. To date, we are looking at about $775,000 in interest earnings on those monies that at the moment is currently stranded in a way. So if we do amend the SPARK plan, our total budget is about $10.3 million. And so far, we've invested and spent about 9.2 of that. The use of the funds is fairly simplistic. These are tax increment or TIF monies, and they can be used to fill gaps in private development projects. Just like TIF, they cannot be used for parks. They can't be used for fire trucks or general municipal purposes. They have to be invested in brick and mortar capital. And that can either be brand new construction or rehabilitation, remodeling of a building. They can also be spent on some public improvements related to that private investment. For example, we did repair some sidewalks right in front of a business, and it was the business's front door. They needed a sidewalk that wasn't cracked. That's an eligible expense. And the state legislation allows these monies to be invested as either a grant, a loan, also an equity type investment. So the state law is pretty flexible. And to date, how has Edina used these funds? We've supported a number of projects that are mostly completed. Our first project was the Edina Theater, getting that building back operational, getting it updated and restored. We also pledged funds to a new restaurant that is currently under construction at 50th and France. That's that basement bar with a music theme. We also invested some funds with the Edina Innovation Lab run by our Chamber of Commerce. While that project is complete, earlier this year we did discuss that the programming in that facility has been terminated for lack of operational funds. But those dollars were invested, the building was finished. We've also invested quite a bit into the Finch Apartments. That project also included a brand new public street, and so we used the SPARK monies to support the construction of that street. Also invested money in the Settings Apartments. That's the new one under construction at 72nd and France. And also made a pledge to the Enclave Lifestyle Communities Project, the old Macy's Furniture site. And those funds are pledged, but they are not yet expended. And then the last way we used them was in creating a streamlined grant program, which provides capital support for small business. And so far, we've used funds for one new cafe up at 44th in France. And I do have a number of other small businesses that are interested in the program, if it can be amended and if we do extend the use of the program. So far we've used, like I mentioned, about $9.2 million we've either used or pledged out of the 9.5 total. So there's still a little bit left. So the amendment has to do with when the funds can be used. The initial legislation required that the program come to a conclusion at the end of this year, December 31st, 2025. The new state legislation extended that date by 1 year. So that would push the use of the funds to be concluded by the end of 2026. It's a minor change, but as I mentioned, I have a number of smaller businesses that are ready to move forward if those funds can be expended. Considering that it's almost October, they're not going to finish by this year. So certainly extending this program 1 more year is certainly recommended by myself. Of course, there's a process to do this, and the process begins here with the HRA and passing this resolution. What this resolution then does is set in motion a public hearing to be held in October, and then bring it forward to the City Council for final consideration in early November. So today is just the first step in this process. If you approve this resolution today, you will hear about this again on at least 2 future occasions. I also wanted to put a slide in here about what if we don't do this? What if we decide just to let the program expire and leave some funds in there? So that certainly is an option for us. If we decide not to amend the spending plan, there's about $900,000 in funds that would be unspent. What the process would be to, at the end of the year, early next spring, we would take those leftovers monies and return them to Hennepin County. They would then redistribute those, not to individual taxpayers, but to the taxing agencies. So the city would receive about 1/3, the county would keep about 1/3, and then eventually the remaining 1/3 would find its way to the state. So that's what would happen if we did not amend the plan. Certainly my recommendation is to have those tax dollars that were earned in Edina, collected in Edina, returned to Edina to help our community. Nothing against the county or the state, but these are local tax dollars that I feel are best expended here in our community. So if we do extend the program, I would recommend retaining the same process as we've used the last couple years when it comes to deciding how to use those monies. It's not purely a staff decision, but even that streamlined grant program, I'll work with the original business owner, put their proposal together, review it and vet it, but then bring it forward to this body and have you approve those contracts, whether it's a grant or a loan, so that process would remain the same. We do require a local match. It's not just free funds. It is intended to fill a gap and to see that project move forward. And of course, the burden of actually building it, hiring the contractor, hiring the architects, complying with all the applicable laws, we keep that in the hands of the private owner. All we're trying to do here is provide them a little bit of capital to give them that push to get the project over the finish line and get it built. So that full process would remain the same. And the types of projects that we'll be considering are also the same. There's no change there. We'd be looking at renovation of vacant commercial buildings or vacant tenant spaces. That would allow new businesses to come to our community or existing businesses to expand. Also eligible would be construction of new facilities, whether that be a commercial business or even a multifamily home or a multifamily project. That's also eligible. And then, of course, we still would be able to make some minor improvements to public roadways, parking, sidewalks, those public elements that are directly related to the business. If that's necessary, that remains an eligible expense. But just to be frank about it, the focus here is getting these new businesses up and running. So in summary, this initial spending plan goes back to 2021. Based on this new state legislation that passed this year, we do have the ability to extend that program by 1 year and increase the budget to a small degree. Based on my conversations with the businesses in the area, this is a program that would be helpful to our businesses to really fill those vacant spaces and allow job creation in Edina. So I certainly do recommend that this resolution be approved. I turn it back to you, Madam Chair, for any discussion or any questions.
Okay, do we have any questions? So we'll do Commissioner Agnew first.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for being here today. So I have a couple of questions. So for the interest in particular, what happens if we can't spend that? Does that also get returned, or do we have to do something else because it's interest?
Great question. So my understanding is that interest earnings on TIF dollars need to be included in the, they're retained in that TIF district. So if we don't invest them in this program, they would go back to the old TIF districts. Since those are decertified, they would then be returned back to the county for distribution.
Okay, so they would follow kind of that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3
Correct.
model.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to kind of just trace this through to make sure that I'm following it. So really what we're talking about here is this newly created Spark program and the associated kind of funding plan with it. There's the 10.3 million total. We've previously pledged the 9.4. But because of the timing of everything, even though we've pledged that amount, we wouldn't necessarily be able to meet all of those pledges if we don't extend this timeline to give additional time for those projects to get underway and see completion. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct.
Okay, so there's both the let's stick to the obligations or the commitments that we've already made of here's the pledges, let's do that full 9.4. And because we now have this new interest that we're able to actually recognize and potentially use, the 775 plus some additional residue, 900,000 could also be used now over the next year-ish for some smaller additional projects. Is that correct?
Also very correct.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's the only clarity I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Agnew. And then Commissioner Risser.
Could we go back to the image that showed the projects that have been funded? Okay. And I do have concerns about TIF being used on top of TIF, and that happened with the settings. It happened with the Macy's site. And so question, when this legislation was created back in 2021, was there nothing in it that said you can't give Spark funds to an extant TIF district? It seems like double dipping.
There was nothing in the state legislation that addressed anything like that. The whole purpose of that legislation was to invest in businesses for job creation, whether it be construction jobs or permanent jobs. And when we pledged TIF to the 7200 project and the Enclave, when we pledged TIF and Spark, it was Spark in lieu of TIF. So for every dollar of Spark money that goes into the project, that'll be one less dollar of TIF money that goes to it. So it's not layered on top, it's a replacement.
So we will be getting $4.8 million back from the TIF funds and it's over 4.8 million. When will that 4.8 million end up coming back to us, and could we get it? I'm very concerned about that, in part because it financed very small rental units, and it's possible those 15 very small rental units might even be reduced to 13 or whatever. We don't really have any control over that. And by we, I mean HRA and City Council. And there was an article in the paper yesterday about small rental units really being naturally occurring affordable rentals. And I really feel like we spent $4.8 million on something that does not bring much public benefit. And I would love to see those dollars go back to the county. We're looking at an 11.03% levy increase. And with that, and actually I'm a little disappointed because I thought when I looked at this really quickly, I was thinking, oh, we've got $9 million that could go back to the county, but that's not what we have. But as we look at this list of things we've invested in, it's just very disconcerting. The other thing, the Innovation Lab, it didn't succeed. It involved moving to another building. It involved our lodging tax revenue compensating for the rent that the Innovation Lab was supposed to pay. And so I'm looking at this list and I'm looking at TIF financing in general, and I can't help but think about how, we really need to be analyzing these TIF investments and keeping in mind the impact on the levy, because if the money had gone back, we'd be looking at a very different level of increasing the property tax levy. So I am very concerned about this. I have no idea. Well, I did see 3 potential investments with the leftover funds, but and one is the e-building, so putting more TIF into that, and that was the Innovation Lab investment. So I feel like I need a lot more information before I can approve this. I realize, in the grand scheme of things, we're not talking about a huge amount of money, but this is, for me, really troubling. So I did want to say that. Thank you.
I will recognize you, Commissioner Pierce. I just want to say, what we're approving today, when you say you want more information, is to move this to the City Council to allow a public hearing. And I just want to put that out there, that will give us the opportunity to hear from the community, and that's another source of information besides Manager Neuendorf if we move forward.
Right, and I have thought about that, and for me, I feel like this needs to stop now. I feel so strongly about how TIF dollars have been invested that I think it would be good to just stop. But I hear your point, and so I just want to let people know where I'm coming from.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Pierce.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So my 2 questions, I think, are really tangential to Commissioner Agnew's questions. But if you could go through and just explain, you used 3 terms. You pledged, spent, and allocated. And so with those 3 terms, what's the impact at the end of 2026 of funds that are pledged but not spent? Funds that are spent, I think, is pretty clear. And then you also mentioned allocated.
Sure. So I've used the terms allocated and pledged to be interchangeable, so I apologize for any confusion there, but there's not intended to be any difference. Okay. Whenever the city and HRA uses TIF monies, we pledge them and require the developer to do the work first. I can't think of an occasion where we would have prepaid the developer. So once we pledge that, those monies are removed from our budget as available because they've already been pledged. A good example might be the Finch project. So that project was approved, I believe, in 2022 or 2023. We pledged those monies. Then it took the developer another 6 months to finish the financing for the project. Then it took them 18 months to build the project. And now it's still taking them another 6 months to do all the paperwork after they've opened it up. So we've not, well, actually, I take that back. We just paid them the money. So we pledged it back in 2022, 2023. It was kind of in limbo for several years, and we just wrote them the check in the last 60 days. I don't remember exactly when that was. So that's my intention, is in our internal paperwork, we just don't want to commit those monies twice. So that's why I use the term pledge.
Okay. And so then a follow-up to that, so then projects where we have pledged, if this gets approved, then we're extending the time frame by another calendar year. At the end of that, if those projects are still not completed, then those dollars would then go back to the county? Or what would happen with those dollars that are pledged?
Yeah, so they don't automatically go back, but if the monies are pledged, and I like using real examples, just it helps me think better. So a few years we pledged a small grant to the music facility, the restaurant on 50th Street. It's taken a long time for that project to come together. It's under construction. They broke ground by the deadline, but in our contract for those projects, we have defined dates to start the project, to invest the monies, and then to finish the project. So if they don't spend the monies in time or don't finish the project in time, what we would then do is go back to our contract and declare them in default and nullify any payment on that. And so those pledge monies would then become available, I suppose. But if we reach that deadline of the end of this year, we will not have an opportunity to invest those monies again. It's not an automatic return to the county. I believe we have 90 days.
Okay.
And so then that begins an internal process through our finance department, working with our finance advisor to make sure that we've got the right amount, and then file the right paperwork and get it to the right people at the right time. So there is a whole sequence and whole process there.
Okay. But at the end of the day, it's really funds that are spent, projects that are completed.
Correct.
Those kind of come off the scale, if you will.
Correct.
Everything else is kind of pending a particular process.
Correct.
Okay.
Another example would be the Enclave project. We've pledged monies, spark monies, in lieu of TIF monies for some of their expenses. So far, that project is moving slower than everybody had hoped. They met some big goals. The furniture store is relocated. But if they don't do it in time, we will not pay them, period.
And then my last question, and this is probably a little bit more complicated, but the process of the money going back to the county, and you roughly said a third would come back. And so with that, I had kind of two questions. One, if that money does come back, are the restrictions of how it gets used different than what they are in the Spark program?
Yes, the restrictions are different. So if we do return monies to the county, we follow the state law. So the monies go back to the county treasurer, and then the treasurer follows the state law and returns them to the taxing agencies. They would be received by us as a check made out to the city of Edina to use in an unrestricted fashion.
So it's unrestricted
Right.
when it comes back.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so TIF dollars are restricted to infrastructure for the most part, roads, bridges, private projects, parking, et cetera. But if the monies are returned, we could use it for anything within the city budget. And that would be really a decision by you all as far as how to use those monies.
Okay, thank you.
Golly, that's a lot to, those are very good questions. Now I have all these follow-ups. One thing you didn't mention is money going back to the schools. Can you please review if the money goes back to the county for reallocation, why you did not include the schools in that list?
Sure. So while the schools are one of the largest taxing agencies in our community, the way the state laws work, when the monies are returned to the county, there's a brief period where the county returns about a third to the school district, but then the next year the state recognizes that the school district got more money, so the state holds back the same amount from the school and retains it in the state budget. So there is a 1-year period where the monies are there, but then they're removed. I don't understand the logic in all that, other than that's how the state law works in Minnesota. So if there are, let's call it excess monies, if we do return them, the ultimate beneficiary is the county, the city, and the state, not the school district.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any follow-up questions? Yes, Commissioner Risser.
It would be really helpful if we could see how much money is under pending status. And I can't remember how much was going to the Macy's site project?
Sure. I don't have the precise number, but the restaurant on 50th Street, while it's under construction, they're not finished yet. So that was $225,000.
Okay.
The pledge to Enclave, I believe, is going to be zero. We had pledged the available monies, because we thought we had the deadline this year. We pledged them to either the Settings apartment or to Enclave, whichever moved forward fastest. The Setting is under construction, and they're incurring costs. So I don't recall that any monies would be available for Enclave. I think we've invested them all at this point. And with that streamlined grant program, I believe we have about $150,000 left, maybe a little bit less.
Okay, so not a lot to go back.
Not a lot.
Can you elaborate more on that 4.8? I'm still confused about, okay, that's going to come back at some point, and then it could go back to the county. Can you explain a little bit more how that process works and when that money would become available to go back to the county?
Sure, happy to address that. It's not related to this request at all tonight, but with the TIF district at 72nd or 7200 France, as a community, we pledge the use of Spark in lieu of TIF dollars to the apartment. So the TIF district itself is going to run for 25 years, I believe. So those tax dollars will still be collected. The property owner still has to pay their taxes. That doesn't go away. But at this point, the taxes that they pay will be used to pay for other obligations in that area. We've made a pledge to the rest of the site to build out all the public spaces on the rest of that site. We're considering some type of improvement possibly to cross the road, whether it's a surface improvement, an under the road, over the road, that's a possibility. So the actual, you've posited that the funds might be returned. I guess my best estimate is the return of those funds could be considered in about 25 years.
Okay, so there's no potential for tax relief this year or anytime soon, like 25, a quarter of a century, maybe. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, correct. Those decisions are in the future. We've not even yet begun to collect TIF monies from that district, so we still have to collect them before we can return anything.
Okay, and if before the next meeting, and I know this is sort of tangential, but I think it is really key for people to understand the way TIF is being used, if we could have more information about the affordable apartment units that we're getting in the setting, including the size, the number, all of that, that would be really great. Thank you.
Sure. We'll see what we can do. I believe that was all included in the Planning Commission packet and the City Council when the project was approved. And there is the contract that binds the developer to build whatever was approved. But we're happy to get that for you.
Okay, any other, yes, Commissioner Agnew.
Okay, so one last question then, because we've had a couple of questions about the preliminary levy that we just approved last week, or the week before time. So if we didn't move forward and there were the 900,000 redistributed, 1/3 came to the city, would that or could that have any impact on our preliminary levy for the 2026 calendar year? Or would that have to be a 2027 impacting amount?
I believe we would, maybe there's a two-part answer. I believe the city would see those funds in hand sometime late in 2026. So I don't know what that means for budget modifications, but.
So, right, so we wouldn't be able to count on it when we're making a decision about setting that levy, but we may be able to count on receiving it in 2026, certainly for 2027.
So it would have no impact on the levy that we approve for 2026. It might cause there to be additional residual monies at the end of the year that we could determine
That's right.
on how to allocate and potentially impact 2027.
Yeah.
But there would be no impact to the percentage that we're approving in the coming months.
Right, because those decisions aren't synced up very well. And the decision on final levy is going to be made at either the first meeting in December or the second meeting in December, but either way, you're not going to know the answer to the big question before you have to make that
you.
decision.
And then let's assume, well, for this question, we approve this new spending plan. We have the 900,000 to allocate towards other projects. What will be the process for any of those projects that we're evaluating? I assume that they come back to us, we have a public hearing, we continue to have that dialogue, but if you could walk through us again that process for any future projects.
Sure. We're recommending that we use the same process that we have been using the last few years. So how it typically has worked is either myself or other colleagues on staff will start the conversation in response to the business request. We'll vet their application, review their actual need, review their project, make sure that it complies. For the Streamlined Grant Program, we've had our city attorney prepare a template contract that we use. So we try to keep that one simple. That's why we call it streamlined. So we use the same template, fill in the blanks with a different project description, eligible expenses, but then bring that back to you for your formal consideration. And any larger pledge, we would prepare a contract specifically for that project to make sure that we're covering all the bases and making sure that everyone's needs are met, including the community's needs, and again, bring that to you for your full consideration.
And remind me, do we do a public hearing for those or no?
The public hearing is required to approve the spending plan. But the approval of specific contracts does not require a public hearing. It simply requires that it occur at a public meeting.
Commissioner Pierce.
Just one request. So assuming that this goes forward, when you present to council, and you covered this when you talked through it, but on the background slide 3, we have original total pledged is 9.5 million, but then you kind of spoke to what was spent already. I'd like to see the spent number so that nobody gets the idea that we could, if we did not approve this, we would get $3 million back potentially from the county, because this kind of says we've got 9 million pledged. Right.
Sure, happy to do that.
So, but you did verbalize it. Just would like to see it on the slide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Risser.
And I really appreciate what Commissioner Pierce just said, and I think that really is very confusing. And so anything you can do to clarify that that is not the case would be much appreciated. The other thing I do really appreciate Commissioner Agnew's question about public hearings and TIF money, and there aren't public hearings. And I did just watch I think it was the June 24th, 2021 HRA meeting where funds were allocated for the pedestrian bridge. And just seeing our process for spending TIF money, I feel like our process is not necessarily rigorous enough, and it is very concerning to see just how fast monies can be allocated at a single meeting, and there's pressure and there's time. And in that case, the decision had to be made that day because the next day was the deadline that had to be met. Otherwise, the money would have to be returned. So I really do think as we move forward, and I understand this is one ask, but we really need to review how we are investing TIF, including the process and including how projects get vetted, and including lack of public input, because that is very much something that is part of the TIF process. You don't have a public hearing when it comes to the actual TIF spending for the specific projects. Thank you.
So I'd like to just clarify, those were excess TIF dollars, and that's what we're talking about today, are excess TIF. For creation of a TIF district and spending on a particular project, we have an extensive process, where I believe it starts here and then it goes to the city council. Do we have a public hearing even here? Or do we have 2 public hearings? And then there's also the planning commission. So we start here, and then tell us the process for a TIF project. These are excess TIF dollars, but initially when we're creating the TIF and deciding how to spend it, what's the process?
Sure. The state law does mandate a process that is confusing, so it makes a lot of sense that there's questions about it. And while not relevant to this resolution this morning, when a TIF district is created and the budget is created for that district, there's a whole sequence of actions and events that happens, visits to the Planning Commission, visit to this board, the HRA, as public meetings, input in community comment and other sources is always welcomed. But then a public hearing is held at the City Council. So we put it on the Better Together, we invite comments online, on the telephone, via email, in person, and then through the city's typical protocol, we hold the public hearing, keep the public comment period open for another week or 2, depending on the calendar, and then the City Council makes that decision at a public meeting. But there is one public hearing for the TIF, and that is regarding the entire budget. The actual individual spending out of that TIF budget then is still brought to the HRA and the City Council at a public meeting, but without a public hearing. So the state protocol as well as the city's protocol requires that all those activities happen at a public meeting, but does not require an additional public hearing on every expenditure.
Thank you. And then what we're talking about today are funds that were collected in excess of the original plan. The state said, we don't know the impact of the shutdown related to COVID. We are going to give cities the opportunity to take these monies that they have in TIF districts and apply it to economic development so that the impact felt to our economies based on the shutdown and the disruption of the COVID pandemic, we would have extra money in order to stabilize our economy. And so that's why it's very limited on what we can spend it on. And the question is whether we as a city want to take advantage of this program that the state has given us and now given us the opportunity to extend. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then today's vote isn't a final vote. It's a vote to trigger a public hearing at the city council level, correct?
That's also correct.
Okay. So those are my questions. Any other comments from people? Okay. I will entertain a motion to approve Resolution 25-08, amending a spending plan for the Southdale 2, Pentagon Park, and Wooddale Valley View tax increment financing districts. Do we have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Agnew, seconded by Commissioner Pierce. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, it is passed, thank you. And then we've got another item, and is this under the executive director? Is it, are you going to lead this, Director Neal?
It is, but I'm deferring this one to Bill. And we've had a brief discussion about kind of toning this down a little bit in terms of what we're trying to accomplish today, and I just wanted to let you know that.
Yes, thank you. So it's my understanding that we're going to have, as a commission, a work session on how we use tax increment financing to achieve community goals, a big, broad, overall look at our policy. But today we have an informational only kind of presentation, and that the discussion will be in a work session at a further date. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, well then, Manager Neuendorf, here we go with your next presentation.
All right. So you may remember earlier this year, we gave a little warning that over the last several months in 2024, you collectively had asked some questions about the use of tax increment financing and wanted an opportunity to discuss some of those items. So in the spring, we brought this back to you to try to schedule it, get any additional questions. So what I'll do this morning is run through the questions that we received and don't have any final conclusions, but we do have some options for you to think about. So I'll run through that this morning. Happy to answer any questions. And we're also happy to schedule a discussion at a future meeting, wherever it fits into our calendar. So none of these items are urgent or groundbreaking, but we want to make sure that we're responsive to your questions. And I've titled this discussion about how Edina has used tax increment financing to achieve community goals. Edina has used TIF since the early 1970s. We've delivered a lot of amazing improvements to the community, for the community. Sometimes those projects are led by the city, sometimes they're led by private developers. Depends on the times and the opportunity, but we do keep the community interest in mind whenever we use these. So this morning, briefly, I'll go through our background, I'll go through our TIF policy that was most updated a few years ago, and then get into those 5 discussion topics. So currently, Edina has a dozen different tax increment financing districts. They're scattered throughout our community, always in commercial or industrial areas. As a typical habit, we really don't use tax increment in individual residential neighborhoods, but focus on those commercial and industrial properties that see more challenges. For many years, Edina operated with a very simple TIF policy. It was less than a page, but we're always guided by state law. That's the biggest, policy out there. It's mandatory. But I believe in 2010 or 2011, Edina added our own TIF policy, which basically just reiterated some of those highlights of things we've done for the last 30 years, some of the best practices. In 2022, based on direction from this group, we were advised to redo that policy to be a little bit more thoughtful, intentional, and focused. So in 2022, we completely rewrote the policy, still retaining all of the best practices that we've always been using, but that TIF policy expanded from half a page to 11 pages. And what we wanted, one of our biggest goals there was to put down in writing some of the things that we do on every single project, because there's always questions. So staff knows the process we use, our advisors and consultants know it, but we realized, we never wrote it down, so the general community might have no idea of all the things we do. So that's what's in that 2022 policy. The state law, frankly, is a little bit more generous when it comes to TIF than how Edina has used that. So typically, Edina puts more constraints on the use of TIF than state law would allow. We've done that successfully and for intentional purposes. Again, we're trying to deliver outcomes to the community that will benefit the community for decades and generations. Let's see, so that's the TIF policy. So the 5 discussion questions, and I'll run through these. In fact, I won't go through them here, but just jump into the first one. Is city policy driving the need to use TIF more frequently? So in looking at our past several TIF-funded projects, there's a number of themes that arise, and these are hurdles that private developers see in their projects. And these hurdles have gotten higher since COVID. The cost of materials, the availability of labor, taxes, regulations, they've gotten increasingly more difficult. In Edina, we are also stymied by the high cost of land. Even a vacant property in Edina will sell for millions. Other communities don't have that burden, but that is one of the biggest challenges to development in Edina, is getting the land and then getting it together at a price that's manageable. Material costs, financing costs. Right now, the capital markets are very slow to finance big projects. If you look around the metro area, you'll notice that there's not very many big cranes out on job sites these days. The capital markets have really slowed down. We're experiencing that in Edina as well. And, I will say that we are blessed because we will have 3 tower cranes here and hopefully a 4th soon with 2 office buildings, an apartment under construction in the last couple months, and more coming hopefully. But those capital markets are really delaying new projects. Also in Edina, one of our biggest challenges to delivery is the phased delivery on these large properties. The Macy's Furniture site is a great example. In order to build there's 4 phases in that project, as you might remember. In order to build the last one, you've got to build the first 3. In order to build the first one, you have to build all the infrastructure and incur all the costs that won't actually be paid back until the 4th one is built in the future. And so it adds a huge financing burden to the developer. That's, again, just kind of the challenge of development these days. We also see hurdles in demolition costs of old buildings. Sometimes some of the properties in Edina and elsewhere have environmental contamination. That's a big burden cost-wise. Some of our sites, I'll pick on the Macy's Furniture site, they don't have modern utilities, they don't have modern amenities, basic things like a sidewalk. And all those things cost money. The second biggest hurdle today in construction is the cost of structured parking. So especially in a commercial building, as a customer, we typically expect and demand free parking, but the cost to build a structured parking stall can easily get to $50,000 for one stall. Where does that money come from? So I mean, that's the challenge of the developer. There are 2 other hurdles that are related to city policy, and those are the last ones on the list. There is a high cost of our regulatory compliance and our entitlement process. Here in Edina, with our zoning code, we do the multi-step, the sketch plan, the preliminary, the final. We do public hearings, multiple of those. It can take months and months. That all costs the developer time, which is money. So that is something, it's a process we've created. We tend to like how that works. We like to scrutinize the projects. It does add cost and risk to the project. And then another city policy that adds a lot of hurdle is our affordable housing policy, where we ask the developers to build a certain percentage of the units at the same price as every other unit they're building, and then rent it for half of that price, or whatever the precise number is. So that puts a huge drag on their project. But again, as a community, we've established a policy that says if the developer is going to build luxury or market rate housing, we expect that people that are not luxury apartment income can still live in our community. So that's a choice we've made. But I would say of all the 11 major cost factors that are hindering development, the city is involved in 2 of those. We could change our policies. We could change our process. That would help the overall development picture, but it doesn't eliminate all those other 9 hurdles that we have zero control over. The second item is regarding our process, and I can condense that to a question of whether or not there's a preferred order and timing when we consider the use of TIF. So I've got a couple slides. I'm going to just start with one, and then I'll jump to the conclusion. But in the yellow box, a reminder that our current policy requires that zoning consideration and financing consideration be kept in 2 separate lanes. When, as a city council or as a planning commission, when they make a decision about zoning, they're prohibited by state law to consider the financing implications of those zoning decisions. So how we apply that here in Edina is to keep those 2 conversations separate, so that just to prevent any short-circuiting where a comment is made in the zoning conversation about, well, I don't like the cost, so I'm not going to approve the zoning. That's a good way to get the city in some legal trouble. So we keep those 2 conversations separate. And we'd recommend that we continue to keep those separate. But the timing can certainly be adjusted. The second thing that we do currently is the order of the project is to have the preliminary zoning go first. And if the preliminary zoning gets approved, if there's actually a project to talk about, then we talk about the financing second. And we've chosen that process just out of smart use of city resources. our thought process has been if a zoning request is too big or not enough or, doesn't pass muster from the zoning perspective, why spend weeks and months and thousands of dollars of time on a financing request that might be moot? So we've structured the financing conversation after the zoning. Those are choices we made, and those are the choices we can change. So let me jump ahead to kind of a summary. So this is our current process. When it comes to a development project, we first look at the sketch plan through the Planning Commission and the City Council. Then it goes, step 2A is the preliminary zoning, Planning Commission and City Council. If that's successful, we jump to the HRA and talk about financing. We put together a very detailed term sheet so that we know exactly what we're getting into. And then step 3 is once the developer knows that they've got their zoning, that they've got an ability, a pathway for city financing to help fill in their gaps, then they really go big and spend all their money on the construction plans, the site work, all the environmental. They get their full financing packages together, and then they come back to the City Council for step 3A, which is to get that final zoning finished. And then usually the same meeting or maybe the next meeting will come in with 3B and do their full TIF financing agreement. That's our current process. If we think there's a better way to do it, this would be our suggested process. Start with a sketch plan, just like we do today, but flip-flop the discussion of TIF financing with the preliminary zoning. What we currently do is, as the project comes in for zoning, I work hand in hand, or Stephanie Hawkinson, depending on who's managing the project. We'll work hand in hand with Carrie and with the developer because we know that in our TIF policy, we have certain expectations. If we're going to use TIF, we expect them to meet our sustainable building policy. We expect them to meet our affordable housing. There's a whole number of other goals and guidelines. So if they're going to need TIF, we make sure that they've satisfied all of our goals. So while that's how it happens today, but we could certainly flip the order so that they come in a sketch plan, they get some general direction, it seems like it goes well. We could come to the HRA first with a very rough term sheet, knowing that they've got a financial gap. We wouldn't know what it is yet, but we knew that there'd be something. The reason we don't know the gap is they haven't gotten their zoning. So maybe the zoning allows 6 stories, or maybe it allows 4 stories. That can make a huge difference. But usually you're going to know when there's a gap. When the land cost is too high, when there's a lot of environmental impact, when the market costs are just through the roof or financing costs. So we can make some predictions, but they'd be rough. We wouldn't have the precise numbers. But we could easily flip those conversations, come to HRA first, and just see, is there any interest? If there's no appetite, I'd recommend we tell that to the developer up front so they don't waste their time or our time, frankly. If there is some interest, we'd want to have them keep going. They would then go to step 2B and go through preliminary zoning. Then they'd go through 3A and the final zoning, and we'd still conclude with the last step and have the full TIF agreement at the very end. The key difference in this process is that in the beginning, we would have to become comfortable with approving a term sheet that has a dollar amount that's a fill in the blank and a time period that's a fill in the blank. We would fill all those in. I'm not saying we would not, but we would not know that precise amount until the very end. So that's a difference. And then an alternative process, a way to really shake things up, is to try to do it all at once. Start with our sketch plan, and then at preliminary zoning, the same day, have the city council take action on the TIF financing and the zoning at the same meeting on the same day. They'd be 2 separate motions. It's possible. I don't recommend this. It could be a huge cost burden for the city, a huge cost burden for the developer, and it might invite the city council to interject financing decisions with zoning decisions, which are clearly prohibited by state law. So that'd be the alternative. Don't recommend it, but we could easily flip-flop the timing of the conversations about the use of TIF. So something to think about for future discussion. The third question is about Edina's budget pillars and our budget values. You recall most recently when we considered selling property, the old public works site, we looked at those pillars and values. We could and should also consider how those apply to the use of TIF. I think this is a deeper dive because at our budget pillars, it's looking at a strong foundation for the community, reliable services, building a livable city, and doing it in a way that we're better together. How you apply that to TIF could be a whole nother workshop, but as staff puts together proposals and works with developers, just so you know, we do look at those values, we look at those pillars, again, to achieve the goals as have been defined in our plans, our policies, and your direction. And the same with our values about how we use those monies. For stewardship, we ask, is TIF investment, is it best in a particular type of project? Right now, we use it for private and public, for housing and for residential and for infrastructure. If you want to change any of that, we certainly could. For equity, we want to look at how can TIF investments be used to provide equitable outcomes for more people. For health in all policies, we look at how TIF can be used to promote that overall well-being, whether it's providing a sidewalk or providing a new social opportunity or providing a new grocery store to get healthier vegetables to people. Lots of different ways that TIF can trickle down to our real world. But with the values and pillars, I wanted to just put this up here and start that conversation. We are trying to incorporate these values and pillars into more and more of our decision-making. So that's an option for future discussion as well. The fourth question comes up regarding the specific types of costs that this group is comfortable using TIF for. In the last year or so, we've had a lot of conversations, right? A lot of discussions with this body or the city council. And I've heard comments like, well, I like the project, I can deal with TIF, but I really don't want to use it to pay for this. One discrete little item. And then someone else will say, I like the project, I can somehow get comfortable with TIF. In fact, I think TIF is a good thing, but I really don't want to use it for that thing. We can certainly decide with your direction if we should exclude any of these costs. I would just offer a bit of caution in that every project is different and unique. And so if you set a policy saying, we're never going to use it for parking, you might get a project the next month that if parking isn't somehow addressed, it'll die. So just a word of caution there. We keep the flexibility for a reason. The two additional policies that Edina does apply are on the right-hand side here. The left-hand box shows all the things, all the categories that the state law allows TIF to be used for. On the right-hand box, Edina's policy currently exempts two of those things. We typically do not allow TIF to be used for private parking. If it's the executive officers' heated underground garage, they should probably pay for that themselves. If it's on-street parking for anybody that gets rainy and snowy, well, maybe we're comfortable with that. But we don't use TIF for private parking. And then when we do use TIF, we always equate it to the value of the public benefits that are being delivered. And that's been a foundational element of Edina's policy since the 70s. That's something we really recommend we stick with. But over the next couple weeks or months, certainly, feel free to think about, are there any costs we should exclude or change? It's our policy. We can modify it. And then the last question comes from our strategic use of TIF. Currently, our TIF policy is performance-based. So we look at a project on a case-by-case basis. Everyone has been different. I've been here 14 years. Everyone has been different. So our policy is written to be responsive to the needs of the project. But it makes it challenging. You know, when staff brings a presentation and proposal to this body and the council, it can be a tough decision. There's a lot out there. You know, staff invests dozens or hundreds of hours on some projects, so we know it well, and then we ask you to make a decision in 90 minutes based on lots of input. So in the last year, it was the topic was brought up, could we change that strategy to create TIF programs that are well-defined with specific guardrails and goals? We certainly could. I've seen that in other communities. I've done it in other communities. So some of the types of programs we could consider would be a specific program to use TIF for affordable housing. We could come up with a specific program to use TIF for infrastructure, roads, bridges, retaining walls, pipes. We could come up with a TIF program to incentivize development of a particular site. If there's some property in town that's just become a drag on the community, we could come up with a program for that. And then I would always suggest a TIF for other unique things, because there's always things that don't fit in a box. But we certainly could go through the effort to create pre-established programs. The thinking is that staff and our advisors could vet the applications to make sure they comply with the program and bring it forward to you. It sounds great in theory, doesn't it? If it could be that simple. A couple of the challenges and some of the negative consequences of that, though, I would want to raise to your attention. I mentioned I've been here 14 years. Every TIF project I've worked on has been different and unique. It's hard to put them in a box. Nothing in Edina is replicable. All of our commercial properties are a different size, a different shape, a different location, with different problems and different opportunities. So that flexibility is a good thing. So just be cautious that if we bring a proposal to you following a program, 9 out of 10 of them are probably going to say it complies with the program except for these 2 or 3 things. So just a bit of caution there. Also, when you create TIF programs, in my experience, you get more TIF applications. When you declare we've got a program that's going to be TIF for affordable housing, you're going to have a lot of developers coming in to build the project, and they're all going to ask for TIF because we have a program. Why would we not use it? Now, if there's a community goal that we want to push affordable housing, I just picked the first one on the list, maybe that's what we want. But if it's private development, just a caution, when I've created predefined TIF programs in other communities, every developer that walks in the door finds a way to meet those program rules and says, hey, you've got a program. I've checked all these 8 boxes. Let's see the contract. So it takes away some of our discretion, and it seems to be, it illustrates to the development community that we want to participate. Whether they need it or not, we want to. And I don't know if that's the message we want to send. And then in some of these programs, I found we've had discussions about how much TIF is the right amount. And as a general rule, someone once said 10%. No one can find out who said that or when they said it. But we've heard that from a number of consultants and advisors. If we come up with a rule that says we're going to cap TIF contributions out at 10%, expect every application to come in here at 9.9%. Whether they need 3% or 12%, they will come to that. So that can be some of the negative consequences of these programs. But that being said, there's no wrong way to do this. There's the Edina way. So for the last 50 years, we've used tax increment to fund a lot of amazing projects in town. Centennial Lakes Park, Edinburgh Park, Grandview, 50th in France. On a number of occasions, we've used those in those areas. So if there are higher priorities, and if there are some programs that we should establish to deliver what we want, we're happy to create those programs. And we'll figure out a way to make sure that they're not gaming the system. But I just wanted to plant that seed and put that in your mind, because TIF can be an amazing financing tool to deliver what the community wants. So if we want to change our strategy, we're certainly open to that conversation. Those are our 5 questions that I've received over the last several months from you all. Happy to entertain any questions. I just wanted to get this started. We can have a conversation in the future, but are there any questions before I wrap it up?
So I want to just kind of limit to clarifying questions this morning. I'd like to have that discussion when our chair is here. So Member Risser, you had a question.
Can we include PUD and of zoning in this analysis? Because oftentimes there is a commitment made in the PUD zoning that does, carry financial costs for the developer, and there's the assumption that that is part of the PUD agreement. And I think what we're missing from our analysis is acknowledging the financial benefits a developer gets when, say, they're able to go from, like with Maison Green, it was a 2-story limit and a 4-story limit on that site, and they got to go 7 stories. So what is the value of that? And then what is the, what do we think we're getting for that? Because then, when we've seen this happen, we think we're getting something, then, we need TIF money. And so PUD has to be a part of this analysis. And I know we're kind of running past time. The other comment I wanted to make is I am very open to taking another look at the Grandview design guidelines and the costs, the Greater Southdale Area design guidelines and the costs that those impose on developers. And I do think, that plan was a while ago. It pretty much put a grid on top of the Southdale area. It's expensive. I question really the wisdom of dividing up our very few remaining larger lots. So there's a lot there that I think is problematic. Thank you.
Any other? Yes, Commissioner Agnew.
And yes, it was on this page, so thank you. So you mentioned that if we were to kind of flip the preliminary zoning with the term sheet approval, that we would have some ambiguity in the exact numbers. Like, talk me through how exactly that would work. Would we be looking at maybe a range without the final numbers, or what would we actually be approving? Because I don't think we could approve something that's like question mark.
Right. Yeah, sure. Happy to address that. So how I envision this is, the process is always iterative. So when there's a TIF district created, we always create financial projections of the future taxes that are going to be created. If a developer is in for a request for either a 4-story building or a 6-story building, depends how zoning goes, I will ask our advisor, run it both ways. What do the numbers look like? What happens if it's at 4? What happens if it's at 6? And what we can then create is a pretty good estimate of the amount of taxes collected based on that project. And that's regular taxes that go into everybody's general fund, as well as the incremental taxes. So we know what that maximum is going to be. What I would do is put a not to exceed amount of like 90% of that. I always want to err on our side. We always do that. We don't want to err to benefit the developer. We err to benefit the community. So while we would create a maximum amount, it all depends on what happens at the zoning. Do they get the 4 stories, or do they get the 6 stories? Do they get this density or that density? Do they have to do a public plaza or not? So the actual commitment to them would be undefined, but I could see my staff report saying total amount not to exceed X for a certain type of cost: public parking, public spaces, public plazas, affordable housing, that type of thing. So we would try to be as definitive as we could as far as the maximum dollar amount and the types of expenses, without having a precise amount in the early days. And
Okay.
hopefully that would be some good comfort.
And that's helpful, and I mean, maybe this can be a part of the discussion when we get further down, but I'm just curious if you'll even know enough at that point to have the level of granularity that, and not super granular, but that we've benefited from before, of seeing here are the 6 components of the project that are eligible for and are therefore contributing to this total dollar amount. Because I know that that's what's led to some of the discussion of, oh, I don't want it for X, or I don't want it for Y. So maybe just something to reflect on of, like, how much information would we be able to have? And maybe even as we have a discussion, coming forward with an example of like, this is what we think we might know at that phase of the process, or even having, a side-by-side of like, we might come to you for step 2A and have two different options or two different points that create the spread of the range. That might be helpful. Thank you.
All right, Attorney Kendall.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to make a quick comment about the interaction. So the City Council having approved a PUD zoning does not obligate the HRA to grant TIF. In order to meet the but-for test, they do have to come in on a TIF application and indicate that the project will not go forward but for TIF. But that does not mean that the HRA is required to approve that TIF. You can still have discretion to not approve that, and then they can go back and look for more private financing, or they can ask for amendment to their zoning. But the fact that the City Council has approved PUD zoning does not obligate or require the HRA to grant TIF, and the reverse would also be true. So however, whatever order it's done, this body, whatever capacity you're acting in, just has to keep in mind that you have to apply the standard for whatever application is in front of you. So if you're looking at a PUD, you apply the standards for that, and if you're looking at TIF, you apply the standards for that, and you shouldn't feel obligated to grant TIF because you approved a PUD as a City Council, and vice versa, you shouldn't feel obligated to approve a PUD as a City Council because you've made any preliminary determinations on TIF as the HRA. So I think that always needs to be kept in mind as you approve or review these applications as two different bodies.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that clarification. What I heard Commissioner Risser say is that when we first heard about the Southdale guidelines in particular, that it would create so much new value by using the PUD process, and we have not been getting a quantification of the value created by using PUD, and I think that's what she's referencing. And thank you for that clarification. They are two completely different decisions: the use of TIF and the use of PUD. But folklore or common understanding is that PUD does create value for the developer, and I believe she's asking for, is there a way to quantify what that value is?
Yeah, and we'll certainly give that some thought. We would have that value conversation as a HRA, because again, and correct me if I'm wrong, City Attorney Kendall, but I don't believe financial considerations can be included in your determination of whether or not to use PUD. So we'd have to have those conversations here, but we'll certainly give that some thought and see how we could address that.
I think that's for our discussion as an HRA about the policy, not about any particular program or project that's before us. That's my understanding. Member Risser, or Commissioner Risser.
Correct, right. And I think another part of this is that we have the TIF district is the PUD site, is the site plan of the developer. We're not doing things like Centennial Lakes or, we are, in the past when we referenced these really big projects or much larger projects that had public benefit, that was a very different use of TIF than what we're seeing now, where, we're not talking about a TIF district for an area of France Avenue, we're talking about France TIF 1, 2, 3, and those are all individual developer projects that get PUD zoning and get TIF. And so it's a very sticky situation, I think. And your comment about, I agree with what you said about the Greater Southdale Area Design Guidelines and, not really seeing what we were expecting to see. It's not coming forward the way like Centennial Lakes did. But I think part of the problem and part of, in terms of public transparency, is really just thinking about how much public benefit, including the PUD benefit and the TIF, do these individual development sites get, which may have been what you were saying, I was saying, but I just want to emphasize the point, these are small little TIF districts.
So I think what we want to do for purposes of our future discussion is have, if there's a way to find quantity that we could attribute to using the PUD financial benefit, that would be helpful. I think we want to look at it in the abstract. And let's see, are there any other follow-up questions? Commissioner Pierce? Okay, so do you need any further clarification from us for setting up this discussion that we're going to have?
Nope, not at this time. I'll do some homework on the PUD. I will address it. I'm not sure how yet, but give me a couple weeks and we'll figure that one out.
Okay, terrific, thank you. So that concludes that. Our executive director stepped out for a second. I will go to member comments, and then we'll see if he has anything further. Any comments?
No, nothing for me.
Nothing from me?
Okay, member Risser?
Nothing for me.
Okay, terrific. Well, I'm going to assume we don't have any other executive director comments, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to adjourn by Commissioner Agnew, second by Commissioner Pierce. Any further discussion? All those,
Maybe I'll just add, I believe Manager Neal had another meeting that started at 9.
okay,
that he was
terrific.
presenting
Yes, thank you
for.
very
Yeah.
much. I appreciate that. So with that, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you. At 8:54 a.m.
You got,
Take the
we have
Oh.
to do a vote.
Sorry, yeah. All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Any opposed? We are adjourned at 8:54.